Section 2 of the Daredevil of the Army. Experiences as a buzzer and dispatch rider by Austin Patrick Corcoran. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 1. The author starts for Berlin on a motorcycle and finds himself presently on the Marne. Part 2. 10:30. The guns are booming with ever nearer menace, utterly preventing our attempt at sleep. We are hourly expecting the order to move. Hudson, who is back after what seemed undue delay, reports a tough fight going on in Landrecy. We are holding a narrow street with a few machine guns, on which the Germans continue to advance with their usual unlimited supply of gun meat. It will be dead meat piled high before morning if we can only manage to hold out. But where's Harrison? No sign of him yet either in Landrecy or on the road home. And Poole? Poole had delivered his dispatch. So much Hudson had learned on his arrival, but of Lawrence no sign had been seen. We are discussing the probabilities of capture or collapse with a callousness that would have seemed brutal 2 weeks ago, but which we have acquired with apparent ease of late, when there suddenly looms up out of the darkness of the road a motor bike carrying a strange object behind. Soon a voice proclaims the rider as Poole. But what is the uncouth burden he is bearing? Flesh or fish? Dead or alive? It answers both questions by jumping to the earth when the bike comes to a jarring halt. It is the subaltern, who has come out to take the air for a moment, who announces its identity by an ironical question. "Been shrimping, Lawrence?" he asks politely. Only then do we recognise our chum. A shapeless mass of slimy mud which clings to his clothes, his hands, his hair, his face. He looks for all the world like some prehistoric animal that has just risen from its oozy lair. Rotten duck pond. He spits and shakes himself as he tries to talk. Been floundering about in it for hours. Dived into it head first, trying to take a nasty corner at full speed. The damn bike drove me down deeper. It came right on top of me. Must be a couple of miles of the stuff down under the water." He was the first of us to get really intimate with the squelchy qualities of northern French soil. "Even when I got my head above water I couldn't get my feet. The more I tried, the more entangled they seemed to become. Might as well have tried to walk with leaden shoes on." How long it would have taken him to extricate himself alone is a question I leave to the imagination. It was Poole who finally rescued him after he had been struggling for what seemed hours. Even then it took strategy on the part of the two, as, indeed, it had taken foresight on Poole's part. He had delayed for some time in Landrecy, waiting for Lawrence to turn up. They had taken different routes on setting out. On the off chance that an accident had happened, Poole had changed his road on the way home. Hence the rescue. And now, as Lawrence retires to the farm pump, we notice that his saviour looks rather white-faced and nervous. "Anything wrong?" asks Grant. "Oh, nothing much. Had a narrow squeak with some Ullans." He seems entirely indisposed to go into detail at the moment, so we open him a tin of bully and fetch him some water to help him in recovering his aplomb. If we thought thus to elicit the story, we were mistaken; for, even under the inspiration of a full stomach and a lit pipe, he refuses to satisfy our curiosity. We might never have heard what really happened if a strange chance had not given us an inkling of the story, and forced him to confess to being a hero. It was about half an hour later that a troop of our cavalry could be seen galloping over the hill. As they approached, we could see they were escorting some Uhlans whom they had hemmed in from all sides. Passing the signal office, the sergeant caught sight of our subaltern, and immediately gave the order to halt. Then, riding over, he saluted and explained that he had found the Huns prowling along the road leading from the south east to Landrecy. Now he would hand them over to the officer's charge. They dismounted, preparatory to being led off to an inner room for the customary formality of being questioned. As they did so, one of them caught sight of Poole, and, nudging the other, he was heard to say in quite audible tones, "There he is." But Poole, very busy for the moment with his carburettor, either did not hear or made a fine pretence of not doing so. 5 minutes later, however, the sergeant's head appeared in the doorway, calling for the reticent hero. He departed, to return with a half happy, half sheepish grin. "What's the matter?" "Nothing. Some rot these Huns are talking." But our curiosity was not to be stilled with such an excuse. By dint of probing, both him and the more eloquent sergeant, we got the whole story by degrees. Here it is. It is one of our reasons for being proud of Poole. He had reached a cross roads on his way from Landrecy. Shoot to the right, that was the turn for home. His bike took the curve at a dangerous angle, and, as he once more swept into the level, he raised his head to scan the new road. Lawrence was the object he was looking for, but what he saw at a distance of not more than 100 yards was 6 Uhlans seated on their fine mounts. There was no time to turn, the speed of his bike decided that. And there was little time to think, not more, indeed, than a few seconds. Would he surrender? That might ensure his life, but the idea of a German prison did not entice him. In quick succession these thoughts shot through his mind, each second making a decision more difficult as it brought him nearer his enemy. He was making about 60 miles an hour. "I'll chance rushing them," he decided finally, and, banging open the throttle of his machine, he sent his speed up another 5 miles. 40 yards from them he could see them fingering their carbines. 35 yards he could see one of them, probably a sergeant, shouting an order to the others. 30 yards they were stretching in a line across the road. Letting go one hand, he drew his revolver. 25 yards he could see the 2 centre Uhlans taking steady aim at his head. With a sudden jerk he drew himself erect in his saddle, and then suddenly let his body fall along the top of his tank, at the same time letting go his revolver. He heard their bullets whiz by him. He had spoiled their aim, and he saw one man topple over, hit square on the chest, and the horse of the second rear and come down with a crash into the 2 Uhlans on the left of the road. 5 yards from them he could see they were in hopeless confusion, and as he shot through the broken line exultantly pour le vers, it was the greatest thrill of his life he sent 2 more bullets point blank at the men on the right, and tore past, a dark streak on the dusty highway. Crouched over his handlebars, muscles taut, nerves quivering, he strained his ears for any sounds that might indicate pursuit. They came. He could hear the pounding of horses' hoofs on the hard road. Galloping like mad, he commented to himself, but it would take some centaur to catch up with his bike. Whizz! Another bullet shot past his ear. He crouched still lower on his saddle. And then the gods were kind. There came another crossroads. How he thanked heaven for these winding French highways and the hedges that would hide him on either side. Out of sight, he was safe. A horse can't rival a motor bike. So he came home with a whole but quivering skin. Of course, it was the horses that did the trick, he explains amiably. The bike and the shooting upset their nerves, so they pranced round a bit and spoiled the blighter's aim. I'll buy a horse when I go home and pet him to death. Off again, the inexhaustible Hun is determined to keep us moving. Our orders are to fall back in the general direction of St. Quentin-le-Fer. Cable wagons dash out to reel in as much as possible of the wire they had laid just a day or 2 before. The operators are busy picking up their field buzzers and telephones. A merciful and ingenious government has reduced the weight of their pack to about 3 pounds. Soon they are all piled into the wagons, and we get off, a rather miserable train. Somewhere ahead of us is the brigade commander with his staff. Somewhere in the rear of us is the retreating infantry. All night and the next day we keep on the move. Whither we don't know, but it is somewhere south-west. It is scorchingly hot, and the roads are thick with dust which stifles our nostrils and thickens our tongues. We pass through villages where our coming is the sign for increased panic. Stupefied women surrounded with wailing children are piling their household goods onto trucks and carts. They block our way, but their misery hardly moves us at all. At times we come to a crowd whose patriotism is greater than their panic. They greet us with the Marseillaise. An urchin or 2 already knows Tipperary. They offer us drinks, tobacco and food. All they ask is news. We have none save that our enemy is retreating. We give it, and the women set up a great la-la-ing. Damn their infernal racket, Grant growls at times. We are too tired to string our nerves up to the pitch of proper sympathy. Soon I find myself journeying alone. About 4 in the afternoon we had halted for rest, but I was no sooner off my bike than the signal officer came and handed me a message for the Guards Brigade. He had no idea where they were. Somewhere in France, he declared jocosely. I imagine they're off to the right. As the Germans hadn't caught up with us, there was no danger of my capture, so he didn't think it necessary to send 2 of us. I took the road he indicated, and wandered about for what seemed hours. Finally an Army Service Corps truck loomed up in the distance. The Guards? Someone said they were entrenching around Etreau. He pronounced it Extrooks, but we found it on the map. It was off in another direction. Luckily, however, it was on the Route Nationale, so I found it without much delay. My message was to a brigade major. I was unconscious of my general aspect until I met his eye. I knew I was dirty, unwashed, unshaven. I'd had no sleep in 3 days, so my lids felt as if weighted with lead. My mind had ceased to work, so numb was my brain with fatigue. Only now for the first time was I conscious of my condition. But, as he handed me my receipts, he put a hand on my shoulder. "I'm proud of you, fellows," he declared in his hearty tone. "Our soldiers are magnificent, but then this is their business. You have no traditions to keep up." I flushed with pride under my dust, and he patted me on the back. When one is fatigued, one is foolishly susceptible to flattery. "Pretty fagged, eh?" he enquired next. "Here, take a sip of this." He took out a glass flask from his pocket. I'm afraid "sip" would not describe my drink. As I handed the flask back, a humorous smile twisted the corners of his mouth. "Irish, eh?" He glanced at the flask. "Nothing like the drop of the crater to put the heart in a man these nasty times." He gave me a slap on the back before I mounted my bike, and I went off whistling on my way. I was glad I had been chosen for that trip. I got back to my starting place, only to find they had moved again. It was an hour later before I caught up with the rear of the brigade, camping in the neighbourhood of Venerol, where a halt had been called for the night. We got a cow house for a bedroom, but straw covered the dirt, and we were content with the mere fact that we had some hours to sleep. That night stands out in my memory, an oasis in the parched desert. The oasis fell from heaven. Rain. It came in torrents. To welcome it, we walked out, throwing open our collars and the fronts of our shirts to let it fall on our withered skin. What a tonic it was! We were invigorated, men again. Our gratitude, however, faded next morning, when we had to set out on our road. Perhaps you have ridden a motorcycle over slippery surfaces, and you know what the slime does to the wheels. But try to imagine yourself keeping the bike erect on the slithery tops of cobblestones, not those smooth flat stones you find in England or America, but those round, uneven, beautifully curved cobbles standing anywhere from 4 to 6 inches out of the earth with which they pave the village streets in France. By noon my wrists had swollen to an unbelievable size from the effort of my task. I knew now why the foreseeing authorities had chosen strong men for the Despatch Corps. We were all but exhausted when we reached St. Quentin. Our stay in the quaint old town, however, was destined to be short. The Germans were coming on pretty fast. Behind us we could hear the guns thundering out their terrific threat. There was nothing to do but keep moving. The sun had come out again, so we jogged along in our dull, damp misery, halting now by the roadside to eat such food as we had, or pulling up at a stream to bathe our heads in the cool water. A trip to a neighbouring town broke the monotony for us riders. Cable communications were out of the question for the present, with the Huns close on our heels. It was up to the Despatch Corps now to keep the small body of the British Army articulate. L'affaire. It is Saturday. At least so they tell us. We have time for a shave and a wash, with a fairly decent hot meal as meals go. We sleep in houses to night, and come out in a square in the morning to catch a glimpse of the Taube overhead. It is no more than 2,500 feet up. Instantly the Tommies straggling round start a perfect fusillade with their rifles, and succeed in doing more damage to themselves than to the Boche. Not to be outdone, I whip out my revolver and take a pot shot in Woolly West fashion. "Ah, don't hurt him, sonny," says a sarcastic voice at my side. In my excitement I had forgotten the limited powers of my Webley. By noon we are off again. A downpour catches us on the road, but we plod on, rather sick and disgruntled. So it goes for the whole week. Always the same order: to keep moving. Always the same accompaniment to our journey: the grim din in the distance. Always the same question in our minds: are we ever to be allowed to face them? Courcy-le-Château, some dozen villages. Villiers-Cotterêts, we tramp through them all. I touch Soissons and a few more on my side trips. In them I pick up such food as I get at an estaminet. Sleep, rest, they are precious things these times. We get them by snatches at longer and longer intervals, and so we approach Paris and the Marne. But that name means nothing to us yet. At last it is September, but we hardly know the date, so confused is our sense of time, and so unimportant has it become. We receive the order to halt. Somewhere on our right we learn is the town of Corcoran, held by the 5th Corps of the French Army. Somewhere on our left is the British Army and the town of Coulommiers. We, the 2nd Cavalry Brigade, wedged between the two, are the link that binds the great chain. This time our signal station is set up in an open field. In one corner by a green hedge squat the telegraph clerks and the telephone operators, setting up their instruments as best they may. At some distance on the grass is our group of dispatch riders, taking a snooze whenever we get a chance. It comes rarely. There is great demand for our services these days. 2 messages an hour, that is our average. In 2 days I cover some 600 miles in my flying trips from one part of the line to another. 2 messages an hour, day and night. There is to be no let-up for the present. We have forgotten that the dark should bring sleep, that the morning should bring breakfast and the noon lunch. Food we have come to regard as a gift straight from the gods. It drops on us like the manna from heaven, descending on us through the agency of an Army Service Corps truck. We eat it when we get it, if we have the time. France was being saved in those days, but how were we to know that? My first day was made memorable by a trip to the French lines. I had never before met our Allied fighters. The officer I wanted was absent, so a French dispatch rider was deputed to take me to the man I sought. The dispatch must be delivered in person. A slim, little, lithe figure on an equally slim bike, which he rode German fashion, with arms aloft on high handlebars and feet sticking up in the air. He skimmed along in front of me, a dainty butterfly leading a cart horse. Uphill I lost sight of him. Downhill I swept by him. I was instructed to keep close behind him, but it was altogether too hard a job. We passed through a village, the name of which I never learned, and my eye was held by the sight of a squat, resplendent officer shining with a profusion of gold lace. I asked his name. Joffre, the man who was then saving France, and he was strolling at leisure through the street. My second day was made memorable by an incident that held my interest. They were making history round me, but what was that to me? My attention was still occupied with comparative trifles, and yet, perhaps, this man whose story I am going to tell contributed more than he or I knew to the victory on the Marne. At least, it was such as he who made it possible. I had delivered a despatch to another British brigade, when I happened to run into Hodder. He was sitting in the signal station, wounded. It was a bystander who told me the tale. He had been riding hell for leather near a wood, when a German sniper caught him on the foot. A fine shot when the target was a despatch rider. Over keeled Hodder and his bike, coming to earth with a terrible thud. It stunned him for a moment. When he recovered his senses, he knew there was no chance for him to mount that bike again, but he couldn't walk with his foot in that condition. Still there was the despatch. It must get through at all costs. Down he went on all fours. There were 3 miles to his goal. He crawled into the wood, which was plentifully scattered with ullans. Luckily they were not looking to find a rider among the underbrush. It took him hours to get through, but he did it. His clothes were in ribbons, his face all scarred, and his foot, but that is better left to the imagination. He delivered his despatch. He got the Distinguished Conduct Medal, but that was some time afterwards, when the great scrap was all over. At the end of the second day we received the order to advance. Lord, how that order stirred our hearts! Move forward! It was the first time since we landed in France. We looked eagerly at one another, half afraid to surmise the truth. Had we really driven the blighters back? Had we actually stemmed the flood that was inundating France with fire and slaughter? Bit by bit the news filtered to us in confidential whispers. The tide had been turned on the Marne. But it was fully 3 days before we, partakers in the victory, knew what our efforts had helped to do. Paris had been saved. Now for the rest of France. Our task had only just begun. End of section 2